Hi, I'm Alex from Last Line and you're watching the Security channel.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Microsoft and you've been watching the PC Security channel.
What's the PC Security channel? What's that thing? Is that like a website?
I mean, you have a website.
Yeah, I do.
It's you have like a YouTube channel where you do kind of
basically only the largest cybersecurity channel on YouTube.
Really?
Yeah. Now, some of you have rightfully pointed out that as an AV tester going to an AV conference, I might not make it out alive. Well, at least I made it in alive. And looking at the weather, that does seem like quite an achievement in itself. And I also got this, the Virus Bulletin 2019 goodie bag. So first off, we've got an umbrella. You know why? Because Virus Bulletin decided to do this in London. Next up, we have a t-shirt, standard stuff, Virus Bulletin London. Then we've got an ad from Endgame, 10 out of 10 for design. What about protection? Well, this is not the video to figure that out. I mean, look at this. It's a book, Proceedings of the 29th Virus Bulletin International Conference. So we've probably got all the papers in here. Oh my goodness, let's see. So they actually printed like a 700-page book. Prevent viruses being passed around. Okay, it's essentially a hand sanitizer. Haha. Linux users will know exactly what this is. We've got something from Facebook. What? Wrench Pry? Reason. They've actually given us a webcam cover. Gotta need this in 2019. And let's see. Well, looks like that's it.
But this means that essentially the virus is loaded in memory right now. And the way that you usually can tell that it's there is if you try to access the disk again. Yeah, didn't work. So we can kind of do this a few times. Oh, there it goes. Yay! Live demo, it worked! Fantastic. All right, and it says, "Hallo Dickerchen, this is eine vector virus."
What about real-time anti-phishing using artificial intelligence? Do you think that's a promising area where we could use machine learning and techniques like that to really beat the bad guys?
With human intuition, you can say that something is bad. And phishing is a good example. I'm sure that the people in this room have a higher percentage of that kind of intuition when you see phishing. If we can say, we can group these things into that's suspicious and that's not suspicious. Yes, there is a way for machine learning to imitate that same intuition. Again, it will do it completely differently from how humans look at it.
Doesn't that kind of limit the possibilities? Because testing in itself is something where you're always constantly exploring the boundaries. So by getting everyone to kind of do the same thing, isn't that limiting?
Well, this is the thing. We're not limiting what testers can do at all.
Okay.
You know, we're not forcing anybody to follow the standard. We're making it available if people want to follow it, and we like to think that it helps testers with the process of making sure that their test is open and fair. But yeah, as I say, I mean, it doesn't actually restrict the way that the test actually works. It only gives advice and guidance on how to share the information.
So is it a timed game?
No.
So how do you win? Like, how many goals?
Best of 3, and every round is till 5 goals.
Okay.
If there's a third round, you have to have 2 more goals than the opponent to close it.
Ah, okay. So it's very different from like real football, where it's just 90 minutes or something.
Yes, in our league.
Just 90 minutes.
We can classify new threats by identifying old code being used. So how do we do that? And that's why we call it genetic, by the way, because we see those relations between families. So we have the ability to extract what we call genes from any binary file, and those genes are essentially just sequences of assembly code that we then can compare to a huge database, which we call the genome database, which contains billions of genes, which are all categorized based on where they've been used before. So you can see malicious genes from specific threats and also trusted genes that has been used in trusted software.
First of all, you're from Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So what brings you to Virus Bulletin?
So we're just here kind of raising awareness of Facebook security. So we've got a bunch of swag that we're giving out. We're trialing our kind of new challenge that we were just speaking about.
It seems like you can always run into that situation where the fox is guarding the hen house, right?
Yeah, yes, and it's difficult, but I would say it's much better for people to have dialogue and to communicate with each other than to be kind of antagonistic.
So what we do is we specialize in providing SDKs for scan, removal, detection of malware for about 20 partners that utilize our software. We have about 100 million users in our ecosystem, and we basically scan for malware.
All imitate, but they're different variants of it.
Exactly. So here you see a closer connection based on the width of the file, of the line, but here you see other versions that have some differences within the code. So this is just a utilization of our API to visualize that.
By the way, I won a cool book. I actually got this book for asking the best question at one of the talks. It's signed as well. Somebody tell these people I'm moving. I don't have space to carry stuff out. Okay.
So it's called Blockchainers, as the back of the blocks actually represent. I'll leave that one there for you. But essentially, you kind of have to chain the blocks together. You get an input block here, and the blocks will talk to one another. So if I take this away, the light's going to go off, and I put it back, it's then going to go green.
So what's your primary product called?
Our primary product is Reason Antivirus. And
Reason Antivirus. Okay, I'll definitely have to take that out for a roll.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to hear what you think too.
How do we prevent threat actors or malware authors from using the basic foundational principles of AI against us? Not just, when it comes to making malware, but also when it comes to evading any systems that we put in place.
This is a good question. In my presentation, I sort of raised that concern quite briefly. But they will do that, and how do we prevent it?
So do you feel like more human intervention in that area will still be necessary going into the future? Because even if, we create a system for detection that's completely based on AI, they figure out the features, let's say, that we're using to train our AI or something like that, they can easily exploit that to create malware that's always going to be undetectable.
And this is really the problem. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes it's a good idea to have your AI in a sort of like a black box, that it's as difficult as possible for the attackers to test with it or reverse engineer it or something like that, because then it's more difficult for them to understand it, how it works. But yes, if they understand machine learning, and if we use machine learning and they understand the data that we're using, this will be a cat and mouse game that will go on. This machine learning here is not the solution that ends that race. It will continue.
The final game is in a few minutes, and I'm one of the participants. So.
Who are in the finals? Who made it?
G-Data versus ESET.
Not surprised. Just wanted to address one of the main questions that came up during a lot of the discussions I had with different AV vendors at the conference. It's the term real-world testing. And I think different people have a different notion of what constitutes a real-world test and what doesn't constitute a real-world test. To start things off, I will define terms the way I see it. So, in my opinion, any test where you're executing malware from the internet is a real-world test. Those are threats that exist somewhere. Yeah, I mean, they might not be deployed right now in a particular campaign, but can be. That's as real as it gets. If you specifically engineer a threat to test a certain product, you develop it just for that purpose, I think that's a synthetic test. And that's not to say that synthetic tests are not useful. I think synthetic tests are extremely useful. Enterprises use them all the time. That's essentially what the red team in InfoSec is responsible for. So it's kind of hard to understand this insistence of a test that starts with the attack vector all the way down to code execution. Because think about it. Every time there's a major attack, the attack vector is usually different, right? I mean, you can have a large campaign of ransomware, but let's say they target a specific enterprise. Sometimes the way they might enter the enterprise is by researching weaknesses for, ages, figuring out somebody left a password or something, and then, or using a remote code execution vulnerability and getting into the computer and then executing the ransomware, or having some other form of malware on the system first and then using that to launch the ransomware. So there are a lot of ways in which attacks are launched, and it's almost impossible to predict how they will be launched in the future or what the next campaign is going to use. We can do a lot of research in that direction as well. I think that's great. But in my opinion, a good security product should be able to deal with any kind of attack vector. Now, there's another interesting concept which I think people need to think about quite a bit, and that is accurate versus useful. So it's very easy for me to do a test with, let's say, 5 ransomware samples that I've manually verified. That would be a very accurate test, and I could report detections of every single product. Would that help anybody? And the answer is no. Now, what I could also do is run 1,500 samples that I don't even know what they are. Maybe there's ransomware in there, maybe there's PUP in there. I mean, if you watch TPSE, that's kind of what I do, right? And sure, it's not very accurate, especially if you're comparing products across different times and different samples and all that. But tests like that can give you a much better idea of how the products function, how effective they are in different scenarios. And I think that's quite useful. Maybe not as accurate, but definitely quite useful. Now, if we could have both, like tests that are extremely accurate and extremely useful, that would be great. But I feel like sometimes you have to compromise between those two, especially in testing. Like, think about testing in any other industry, right? There's no such thing as an invalid test. You don't get to say that, okay, the test wasn't designed with our specific product in mind, or this specific feature works in this way and the test overlooked that. Cyber criminals don't care how your product is designed. They want to exploit it any way they can. So in my opinion, the only invalid test is really if I say I do something and I don't do it. Like, let's say I say the real-time protection is enabled and it's actually not. That is an invalid test. But other than that, I don't see how any test can be called invalid based on arbitrary requirements that are set by people developing the product. I do understand a lot of issues on both sides. I can understand why product vendors struggle with certain tests, but I don't think reducing the scope of tests is a solution to that. I think that just makes tests less relevant. It deprives a lot of users, including AV vendors, of a lot of crucial information, potential weaknesses in their product. It doesn't make technology safer. It's just not a good approach. I mean, it's not like if you're ill, you could just move your hands.
I think if you're 2 people, you can't even...
Well, no, but if you're like really sick, then like fever or whatever, you probably don't want to be playing this.
Yeah.
And effectively everyone else then has to stop showing after.
Yeah, fair enough. I didn't think about that. Yeah. And I'm a malware analyst. How many years in a row have you guys won the finals?
I think you only lost once.
Okay, that's intimidating now.
Yeah.
Chocolates.
Chocolatey treats. I've got some Kit Kats. I think
Bribing people.
I've got normal Kit Kats, dark caramel. That's a good choice. Dark mint Kit Kats. Yeah, I've got orange in there.
Let's see.
They're very popular at events like this. People need a lot of energy.
That's great.
I also very much recommend the Smashing Security podcast.